I mean, Theresa May, is she actually a proper Conservative? I tell you what, the Sun newspaper got my goat today. It's one of the things that's kicked me off with this. I was mentioning on yesterday's show that comparison, but they're comparing Theresa May to Mrs. Thatcher. There's a little piece there. They're trying to argue, poorly I would argue, that the approval rating for Theresa May is higher than Margaret Thatcher ever had. The way in which they're doing that is, a little bit unclear. They're trying to work out as a percentage. It's not really an approval rating in the sense that you might have in America. Now, listen, I'm delighted to say that we have someone who I would say has congruency about him all the time. What he says is what he thinks, and there's no kind of odd bits where you think that doesn't quite connect. I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by Peter Hitchens, columnist for The Mail on Sunday. I want to get his take on this. Peter, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Your thoughts, then, on this comparison between Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher? Is there one?
Well, first of all, let me say, let's not overestimate Margaret Thatcher. I remember when she was just a politician, and that's what she was, and a number of people have made a sort of saint or goddess out of her, which is a big mistake. She had many flaws, and a lot of them are only just beginning to be understood. So I'm not actually a tremendous admirer of her in politics. I think her personal story is quite startling. Of beginning as a grammar school girl in a small town in Lincolnshire and becoming Prime Minister, that has to be quite impressive. But the difference between her and Theresa May is, I think, extraordinarily big. Theresa May doesn't really have, as far as I can see, anything you could call an opinion, whereas Margaret Thatcher was very, very much festooned, hung about, and provided with lots of opinions on many things, some of them wrong, some of them right, but she knew what she thought and what she wanted. Now, attempts are made to portray Theresa May as being passionate about such things as modern slavery, and this may well be true, but this is what I call her vicar's daughter package, where she is concerned fundamentally about moral things. Nothing wrong with that. Indeed, I increasingly feel that our own personal morality is more important than politics, but it's very different from being someone driven by a strong political ambition and desire, as I think Mrs. Thatcher was. So I just don't think the two women are alike in any noticeable way. And when Mrs. May tries to act the tough Prime Minister in the House of Commons, making faces at Jeremy Corbyn, I don't think it ever comes off, because she really isn't very menacing. You don't get the sense there's all that much behind there. She's not there because she was chosen as a kind of attempt to cure the ills of the Conservative Party as Margaret Thatcher was. She's there because nobody else wanted the job. Yeah. Peter, I read in one of your columns once, you said that she strikes you as someone who has the air of a character that keeps looking over their shoulder, expecting someone to say, "Oh, sorry about this. You're not meant to be Prime Minister. We had a job doing widgets over here that you were supposed to be doing." Well, this is the famous imposter syndrome, which an awful lot of people in lofty jobs suffer from. But I think that in her case, she must be concerned. She was a not particularly startling Home Secretary. She was a not particularly startling opposition politician. She was, in many people's view, a rather conventional chairman of the Conservative Party who made a speech quite damaging to her leader at a very important moment in the history of the Conservative Party, which drove it down the path which it's since followed, of being more or less a copy of New Labour. So, to the extent that she's anything, she's someone who's wanted to adapt the Conservative Party to the times. One of the most interesting things about her, and it's seldom dwelt on, and there's never been an answer to it, is that one day, suddenly, she went from being a strong opponent of all women shortlists for selection for Parliament to being a strong supporter of them. During the passage of the Equality Bill through Parliament, which was led by Harriet Harman, she was in many ways quite helpful to Harriet Harman. And I described her at the time as the Tory party's Harriet Harman. I just don't, whatever you want to compare her with, I think Angela Merkel might be a more realistic comparison. I don't think Margaret Thatcher is it. And I'm not by that trying to be rude about her.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I'm wondering how this happens, Peter. I mean, it's strange to me...
Because people don't have anything new to say. They have to think in terms of old categories, and also the real problem with anybody who's trying to make out that the current government is in any way conservative is that it isn't. And that the only way to give that impression, especially in an election where the Labour Party is definitely led by a socialist, is to attempt to make comparisons between Mrs. May and Margaret Thatcher and to claim all kinds of conservative things about the government which aren't really true. There'll be a lot more of this. The truth is that the political difference between Theresa May and most of the Labour MPs, who are not supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, but most Labour MPs and Theresa May have almost nothing to divide them at all. The Conservative Party is New Labour. The Blairite Labour MPs who hate Jeremy Corbyn probably have no substantial differences with Theresa May on the economy, on social policy, or even on education. So I don't think that there's, I don't think that there's really any big point at which Mrs. May can separate herself from New Labour, but she can, of course, separate herself from Mr. Corbyn. So if she can turn this into something that looks like a contest between Margaret Thatcher and Michael Foot from 1983, or whenever it was, and I was actually present for that election, so I should remember. If she can turn it into a repeat of that, then that will suit her perfectly, because it will enable her to look a good deal more different from and tougher than the opposition than she is.
You know, Peter, I find this strange. One of the reasons that I find this strange is because recently I've been invigorated by new ideas that I've managed to pick up on the internet. Ideas like libertarianism and, you know, traditionally right-wing ideas, I guess, that hadn't been articulated to me previously through the broadcast media. To me, it seems like such an exciting time to be alive politically. Yet our politicians, as you're revealing here, they don't seem to have an opinion of their own. Why is that?
Well, there are many explanations. I'm not sure I get terribly excited about libertarianism, which doesn't seem to me to be a coherent position. But leaving all that aside for a moment, the difficulty with modern politicians is that really since the end of the Cold War, unless they were prepared to go out on a Corbynite limb, or unless they were prepared to go out on a Farage-type limb, then the only thing which they could offer the public was what we have, which is increasing globalization with lower prices for consumer goods, but also falling wages and falling interest rates and generally falling standards of living. And that's what they have to offer. And unless you're prepared to go down a strong protectionist route, for instance, which most people are very nervous of, or unless you're prepared to promise swerves to very old-fashioned leftism, there really isn't very much else to say. And most of the supposedly sovereign governments of the Western world don't actually have very much power over our lives anymore. And they can say what they like, but the enormous forces of the global market will overpower them if they try to resist them. And that's one of the reasons why politics is dead, because they haven't really got anything that they can do anymore. If a major manufacturing company suddenly decides to relocate its operations to Southeast Asia and throw 200 people on the dole in England or France, then neither Theresa May nor Marine Le Pen nor Emmanuel Macron nor Angela Merkel can do anything about it. Germany is in a slightly better position because it has, by manipulating whether this is deliberate or not is an argument, right? But by apparently manipulating the European currency to its own advantage, it's been able to maintain a strong export market and a fairly major manufacturing sector. So it's a bit different, but generally, most countries don't really have much choice, and one sees this thrashing about both in the French and the British general elections at the moment, and there is much less that they can do than they claim to. But as I say, I wouldn't get too excited about libertarianism. It's not actually a principle. You can't elevate freedom into a principle because people's freedoms clash with each other. Old Karl Marx, who was no fool, though he was often seriously wrong on things for ideological reasons, said it best, I think. No man fights freedom. He fights at most the freedom of others. And if you believe in your own freedom, you'll very rapidly find that somebody else's freedom treads on your toes. And they will find the same about you.
Well, I wonder, this is my final question to you, Peter, because I know you're a busy man and you sound a bit under the weather as well. I hope you're well.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I don't think I'm actually inarticulate, but I did pick up a very bad cold the other day and it's still working its way through.
Well, all the listeners wish you well here, but
kind of you. No, I think probably some of them don't actually, but I've learned to live with that too.
The hated Peter Hitchens. But listen,
indeed, yeah.
The final question for you here. I remember seeing you address this on Question Time in a way that people might not expect. I'm feeling a little bit like there's not really any point in casting a vote here. That this is an election that I'm not going to bother with personally. What would your response be to that for listeners who are also thinking along those lines?
Well, I no longer offer political advice to people. I've given up politics. I merely, if people ask me my opinion as you are doing, I'll give it to them. But I used to be very committed to a particular political objective, which was the destruction of the Conservative Party and its replacement by a genuinely patriotic and socially and morally conservative formation. And I thought that was achievable in 2010 particularly, if only the Conservative Party could lose the 2010 election, which of course it did, but not spectacularly enough to make to destroy it. And so since then, increasingly, I made a sort of feeble second attempt in 2015 with no great hope of success. But since then, I've really decided that politics has nothing to offer me, and I simply write the obituary of the country. But I don't offer anybody else any advice on this. I don't offer people advice on anything unless specifically asked, I might say, to people under 30 who are at all enterprising. I would say now is the moment to leave this country while you can, because I've never seen a country more headed for disaster than this one is, both in terms of the hard material facts of the national accounts and its terrible moral and educational decay. It's got absolutely everything lining up for a really, really bad and pretty rapid accelerating decay in years to come. I'm too old to go. I can't. I don't believe in battening on other people's countries, even if any of them would let me. So I can't go and start a new life somewhere else. I couldn't make a living. But people who are young enough to do so, I tend to say to them, do that. If you possibly can. And when they say, "Oh, where shall I go?" So that's it's neither up to you nor up to me. You've got to persuade someone to take you. People have got wise to what modern Britain is like. I don't think an awful lot of countries are particularly anxious to import many British people just at the moment. So don't be absolutely sure that when you try to go there, they'll want to keep you.
Do you know what, Peter? You say you've given up in your ambition to destroy the Conservative Party and replace it with a more right-wing alternative. But I'm going to leave you there. Thanks for being on the show.